With the Amazon series coming ahead, a lot of Tolkien fans have already started to split up into different controversial camps in terms of what Tolkien is, what does he represent, what will the Amazon series be like, and how to situate the film trilogy, as well as Peter Jackson's adaptation of The Hobbit. So apologies, because you're going to have to listen to a bit of a trudging and unclear clip. I just want to try to situate both sides because both sides are very confused. One side is arguing JRR is very liberal and therefore Amazon will reflect those liberal values. The other side is, no, he wasn't very liberal, you're just making stuff up, etc., etc. But I want both sides to speak for themselves, and then we'll try to comment and work through what exactly are JRR politics. And you'll have to excuse my narration because it is very much all over the place because his positions are a little bit all over the place. Let's listen to both sides and then we'll respond.
That Catholic Tolkien would have never approved, I beg you to read more of Tolkien's books and letters. He was woke. He was woke, huh? Stood against hate, embraced all cultures in life and fiction. It's why his books are translated in every language. He was woke? I mean, look, I'm not going to say he wasn't, but I'd like to see your evidence for he was, other than just, dude, trust me. If you think Ian McKellen gets a pass, but whatever Amazon is doing is a disgrace to Tolkien, please think more on your personal bias before tweeting. Our block button is very active, and if you retweet or enable toxic voices in the name of free speech, then you do not love Tolkien. Gatekeep more. Hashtag pride. What kind of definition of woke the One Ring is using, because Tolkien is probably the furthest from, quote, woke as you can get from being a devout Catholic. To elucidate this point, Bishop Robert Barron of the Archdiocese of LA describes wokeism as an intellectual virus. While asking if this ideology was the answer to injustice, he provides an excellent definition of what wokeism actually is. Quote, but this is woke philosophy which holds to an antagonistic societal theory, which deconstructs language, which denies the objectivity of moral norms, and which...
Both sides agree foundationally he is a Catholic, but in terms of the counter-response that JR is very liberal, there really is no response, because they said already, yes, he's a Catholic. The article was saying, hey, he's a Catholic, so therefore he can't be X. Believe me, you can be very much on the far left and be a Catholic. There's lots of examples like Michael Harrington, who was a proud socialist, but also a very strong Catholic. You can also be very liberal and a Catholic, like Daniel Patrick Moynihan. So being a Catholic does not preclude you from being on the left or being liberal. So the article didn't say anything. And also this bishop, as far as I know, is not a Tolkien expert. So his expertise doesn't mean anything here. But now we'll get to the main subject, which is what exactly did JRR stand for? And what he did not stand for. And again, it's very, very confusing. So both sides agree he's a Catholic, and both sides also agree he's anti-Nazi. The Nazis tried to recruit him for kind of propaganda purposes, and in a letter, which is very famous now, he said very directly, if you're asking if I'm a Jew, no, I wish I was. And although my name is Germanic, right, because his family is from Germany in the past, Tolkien affirmed he had no love for Hitler. He didn't identify at all with their weird blood mysticism. But does that make him a liberal? A lot of people have honed in on that he hated Hitler and hated the Nazis. And that is true, that's consistent. But he also supported Francisco Franco, who was a fascist dictator in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. The Spanish Civil War is an extremely complex affair, so we can only get to some of the details of that and how it's relevant to Tolkien. But was Tolkien pro-fascist? Yes, he identified with the government. He considered a patriotic nationalist cause, and he was for it. Now then, does that make him a conservative or reactionary? Not necessarily, because he was also for anarchism, and he affirmed a very libertarian, individualistic way of doing politics. And if you read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, ironically, he represents a very kind of primitive communist system with the hobbits, right? That they just keep to themselves, they're very friendly, they trade, they don't have any advanced technology, they have this kind of very small, peaceful, utopian society. But Tolkien was very explicit, he was not a communist, he did not identify with socialism, he condemned Stalin as a murderer, can't be considered a traditional leftist. But was he against all forms of left-wing ideology or all forms of liberalism? No, he's a little bit all over the place. For instance, he was very tolerant towards homosexuality, at least to some homosexuals, because W.H. Auden, who was a leftist, who he knew, he did have disagreements with him, but he kept it to just their differences over culture. Of course, there were political differences too, but he never, as far as I know, singled out his homosexuality as a reason for their antagonism towards one another. But now we're going to have to get back to Franco. He's pro-fascist, and he doesn't like Stalin. Is he a reactionary? No, because a lot of Catholics were split. There's a lot of divisions in the scholarship over the Spanish Civil War. I do think Franco is a fascist dictator. However, you do have some people, including those on the left, who say Franco is not an authentic case of fascism. He's more of a religious dictator, yes, but he's more of a traditional authoritarian. I don't think that's true. And it may not even be relevant because Tolkien was sanctioning murder because that's what Franco did to, again, attack the Republicans and anarchists and socialists. If he is for anarchism, then why did he not support the anarchists? And as he says, he was very suspicious of communism, and he just assumed that, quote, the communists were presumably in control or that the anarchists would create a kind of red dictatorship. So again, he was very suspicious of some forms of the left, but he did not disidentify with all forms of the left because, again, he's very critical of certain policies, especially industrialism, within Britain itself, and he was very, very skeptical of modern technology, which again are very close to anarchism and left-wing forms of anarchism. And he affirmed that he was an anarchist and that he did not like the traditional structures of power. However, he was a devout Catholic. So it seems with Franco, as a Catholic, he identified as a Catholic with Franco because the church, and it did support Franco. And the Republicans and socialists and anarchists opposed the church. Now, Noam Chomsky has done a lot of good work on the Spanish Civil War trying to clarify the different sides. And I think he shows very convincingly that the socialists and anarchists were Democrats, but they were not constitutional, so they did execute people. They did commit some massacres, which he downplays, and they were viciously anti-religious. So they were not very liberal in many ways, but were they dedicated to democracy? I think he shows, yes, they were. Because they had committee systems, they had voting, but again, it was not a constitutional regime that they were fighting for. So there's a split even among anarchists because Chomsky calls himself an anarchist. So it's sort of like Chomsky himself in that he supports Castro, but could you call him a communist? No. Chomsky's reasoning is he supports the government of Cuba insofar as it needs to be independent, and he supports some of their policies, but he doesn't identify with a supporter of Castro. Even though, again, to be fair, he was at a conference where Castro showed up and he was smiling. So again, it seems like we can argue that anarchism within a context can fall towards a reactionary side or more a left-wing side. And Tolkien and Chomsky are all over the place. So anarchism has many different forms. So there is a kind of consistency in that Tolkien was very suspicious of the state. He didn't like governments overall, but he especially didn't like communism. So for a time, he was more suspicious of the communists than the Nazis. So he was consistently anti-communist and anti-Nazi, but he was pro-fascist. This is mainly due to his religious convictions. Does that excuse his behavior? No. Does that tell us he's illiberal? No. He seems to hold a variety of liberal and conservative positions, but not in the traditional way. So on the one hand, his Catholicism is the only consistent principle, but the way it's expressed is very, very differently. So if you're on the liberal side, you're going to emphasize he's an anti-Nazi and he tolerated people of different persuasions, even people of different sexual orientations. If you're on the conservative side, you're going to emphasize he was an anti-communist, he hated Stalin, and he supported Franco. But again, his positions are very complex. And in terms of the current Amazon series, it does seem on the whole, I don't think he would license any of these adaptations. And his son confirms this, that he'd probably be very hostile to these adaptations. But would he be hostile to the politics behind these persuasions? That is unclear. While he didn't like allegorical readings of his work, he didn't mind the readings if they were sophisticated. And he did affirm that some of the work did confirm his fears of totalitarianism. So you can have a political reading of Lord of the Rings, but he didn't like it if it was simple-minded. In terms of his own politics, they seem to be a little bit all over the place. He's a libertarian, he's an anarchist, he's a conservative, and that could also describe Noam Chomsky. But Chomsky is clearly much more situated on the left. I don't think you want to call Tolkien a rightist, but he did support rightist policies and even a fascist dictator. It's not clear you can call him a liberal or a leftist without qualification, but you don't want to call him a conservative or reactionary without qualification either. He seems to have had very individual positions on these various policies. And again, there were a lot of difficult choices during that time period. I am more with Orwell and Chomsky. I do think the Spanish Civil War should have been won by the Republicans. Even though they were very flawed, I think overall they represented the best hope for Spain. We know for a fact that Franco took control and remained in control, dictatorial control, for decades. So, as far as I know, Tolkien never responded to that problem in terms of, well, you say he was just defending the country, but why do you explain his dictatorial control? He had a personal relationship with people in Spain. Father Morgan was one of his mentors. So it could have been his personal prejudices, it could have been his Catholicism overrode his concern for liberal rights. It's unclear. Is he entirely left? Is he entirely right? He's neither. It seems like he took positions from both sides. What it seems is true is that people who are already lining left and right have not done any real research or any thoughtfulness into what he actually said or wrote. So it seems both sides are trying to make him into a proto-liberal or proto-reactionary. Tolkien is a little bit too complex for that. I don't think we have a good label for him. But he was an anarchist, he was a libertarian, he was very critical of the state and government, but he did support fascism, again, contextually, but he did not like Hitler and he did not like the Nazis. So make of that what you will. So he's a little bit all over the place, but that is who J.R.R. Tolkien is. So what is he? He seems consistently, quote, anti-government, but contextually he will support a government if he thought his religion or his personal friends were in danger. So make of that what you will. This has been a short essay on the politics of J.R.R. Tolkien. Thank you for listening.